The new chief executive officer fired me on her first day. The tulips I brought were still trembling in my hands. "Pack your desk, Rachel," she commanded. "You are done here." But 3 days ago, I had signed something she did not know about, papers that made me the real owner. The next morning, my assistant ran in, face pale. "Boss," she whispered, "you need to see what is happening." That moment, the morning of my corporate execution, felt unreal. The executive conference room, usually a haven of calculated calm, was an ice chamber. The red tulips I carried, a peace offering, a bridge between Eleanor Ashford's legacy and whatever Hazel Winters would become, felt heavy and absurd. I, Lucy, Executive Vice President of Operations, was standing at the threshold, about to welcome the young woman who had been groomed to replace me. Instead, Hazel delivered her verdict with the cold, surgical precision of someone cutting out a cancer. Hazel, immaculate in a charcoal suit, did not even glance at the flowers. Her eyes, the color of cold, polished granite, fixed on mine. "Pack your desk, Rachel. You are done here." The wrong name landed like a slap. Rachel, not Lucy. Not the name printed on every award, contract, and performance review for the past 23 years. It was a calculated erasure, designed not just to fire me, but to make me vanish before I was even out the door. Around the polished mahogany table, 3 newly appointed directors sat frozen. They were Hazel's people. Young, sharp, and clearly briefed. Nobody corrected her mistake. Nobody defended me. They just stared. Some with a pity that felt worse than contempt. Others with the uncomfortable relief of people, grateful the axe had fallen on someone else. I had walked into that room, hoping to demonstrate grace, carrying simple, respectful, human red tulips. Hazel had responded by destroying my career and my dignity in a single breath. The tulips in my hands began to shake violently. But the trembling was mine. "My name is Lucy," I managed to say, forcing the words out quietly, a small attempt to cling to my identity. Hazel's smile was thin, victorious, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I know what your name is, Rachel. Lucy. It does not matter anymore. What matters is that Asheford Industries is entering a new era. And that era does not include dead weight clinging to outdated sentimentality. Dead weight. 23 years of crisis management, of all-nighters. Of saving 400 jobs in Chicago, reduced to 2 words of dismissal. The shame of the public spectacle burned, but something else anchored me. It was the knowledge that Hazel was performing for an audience who did not know the final act had already been written. In my blazer pocket, pressed against my ribs, was Eleanor Ashford's fountain pen. It was cool silver, elegant, and worn smooth by 4 decades of use. It felt like a secret weapon, heavy with history and expectation. 3 days earlier, Eleanor's personal lawyer had presented me with a thick portfolio in a sterile hospital room. A room where the only sounds were the soft beeping of machines and the labored breathing of the woman who had been my only family for 2 decades. In that room, I signed the documents Eleanor had prepared months in advance. Stock certificates and transfer agreements. Papers that made me, Lucy, the legal majority owner of Asheford Industries, with 51% of the voting shares. Hazel thought she had won. She thought the game had ended the moment she said, "You are done here." She had no idea the game was just beginning. And she had just handed her opponent the advantage of perfect timing. Eleanor had orchestrated one final test. Let the vultures reveal themselves. And I had to wait in silence while the humiliation unfolded. I placed the bouquet of trembling red tulips gently on the side table by the door. They looked vulnerable and utterly misplaced. The pen, Eleanor's pen, was all that kept me standing straight as I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the new chief executive officer to gloat over a victory that was already meaningless. My steps down the 10th floor hallway were measured and deliberate. I was the publicly executed corporate relic. But the pen in my pocket made me the woman who held all the cards. The pen was cool against my ribs, but the weight of the last 23 years pressed heavier on my heart. A history of sacrifice Hazel knew nothing about. The shame of being dismissed as dead weight was only a fraction of the cost I had already paid. To understand why Eleanor gave me the company, and why I was capable of walking away from the ultimate insult without a word, you have to understand those 2 decades of unrelenting dedication. My life at Asheford Industries was not measured by promotions or salary bumps. Though those happened, it was measured by what I surrendered. I started in 2002, fresh out of college, as a junior logistics coordinator. I was invisible unless something went spectacularly wrong. And I decided immediately that I would make myself essential through competence nobody could dismiss. I did not just learn my job, I learned everything. I memorized every fragile link in our global supply chain, knew the names of warehouse managers in cities I had never visited, and studied our operational blind spots until I could predict problems before they became crises. The Seattle expansion in 2007 should have been the breaking point for me. I was 29 years old, barely 5 years into my career. And the entire project was sinking under a tide of permit delays and millions of dollars in potential losses. The senior vice president at the time was ready to cut and run. I volunteered to fix it. For 3 weeks. I lived in a corporate apartment that smelled perpetually of industrial cleaner. I lived on black coffee and a stubbornness that bordered on mania. I sat across from city officials, environmental activists, and contractors, finding impossible compromises in zoning regulations and environmental requirements. I barely slept. We broke ground 6 weeks ahead of the revised schedule. That was when Eleanor called me into her office. Eleanor rarely smiled. Warmth was simply not in her corporate vocabulary, but she was consistent, and she was principled. She handed me a worn copy of The Art of War. "Read this twice before you make any major decision," she told me, her eyes, though nearing 70, still sharp. "You have instincts, Lucy. But instincts without strategy are just gambling." That book became my strategic Bible. I carried it in my briefcase for years, underlining passages until the pages were fragile. She promoted me, rapidly, from senior operations manager to vice president of supply chain, and finally, executive vice president. I had an office on the 10th floor overlooking the old brick manufacturing plant where the empire began. I thought I was building a legacy, something meaningful that would outlast me. I did not realize I was building a prison with walls made of sacrifice. The guilt lives in my chest, like a stone I swallowed years ago. It never dissolves, never passes, just sits there getting heavier with time. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon, in October 2015. I remember the exact day, because Tuesdays were budget review days. And I was already running late. Her voice sounded thin, like she was stretching it over something heavy she did not want me to notice. "The doctor wants to run some more tests," she said, trying to sound casual. "But I am sure it is nothing, sweetheart. You know how they are. Better safe than sorry." I told her I would drive up that weekend. I meant it completely. But on Thursday morning, the Chicago plant crisis erupted. 400 jobs were at risk. A key supplier threatened to walk away over a contract dispute. Millions in potential losses, if we could not negotiate a solution before their Monday deadline. Nobody else seemed capable. I flew to Chicago on Friday afternoon, instead of driving north to my mother. I told myself it was temporary. One weekend. One crisis. She was strong. She would understand. She always understood when work demanded everything from me. The test results came back Sunday morning. Stage 4 lung cancer. The oncologist gave her 3 months if she was lucky, maybe 4. I tried to rearrange my schedule. I genuinely tried. But the Berlin merger negotiation started 2 weeks later, and Eleanor pulled me into her office, with that expression I had learned to recognize. The one that meant she needed me specifically. Because nobody else could do what needed to be done. Your mother raised a woman who saves families, Eleanor told me. Her hand resting on my shoulder, in the closest thing to maternal affection she had ever shown me. She would be proud of what you are doing. 400 families in Chicago still have paychecks, because you flew out there and fixed what nobody else could fix. That matters, Lucy. So, I went to Berlin. I spent 6 days negotiating contract terms, arguing in broken German and living on coffee. I closed the deal in half the projected time. I felt accomplished on the flight home. Valuable. My mother died while I was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. I had turned off my phone for the international flight. Company policy about secure communications. When I landed and powered it back on, I had 17 missed calls and a voicemail from my aunt that still plays in my head some nights. She asked for you at the end, honey. She kept saying your name. I told her you would be here soon. I am so sorry. I made it to the funeral 3 days later. I wore a black dress I bought at an airport shop. Because I had not had time to go home first. I accepted condolences from neighbors who barely remembered my face. I stood at the graveside while a pastor, who had never met my mother, delivered generic platitudes about her kindness. I went back to work the following Monday. Because that is what you do when you have already sacrificed everything that mattered. You keep moving forward. Because stopping would mean acknowledging what you had lost. And that acknowledgement might shatter you completely. For 2 decades, I believed that sacrifice was the cost of greatness. I thought I was essential. I thought my worth was tied to my indispensability. I never considered that Eleanor, the woman who demanded everything, would also be the one to orchestrate my final escape. I did not realize she had seen the cost of that sacrifice long before I did. Now, Hazel, the aggressive new chief executive officer, was here. Ready to dismiss 23 years of loyalty as sentimentality. But I was no longer the woman who only knew how to sacrifice. Eleanor had given me the tools to fight back, and more importantly, the strategic permission to wait. The battle would not be fought on her schedule, or in her style, but on mine, with the quiet authority of patience. I had sacrificed everything, yet Hazel was dismantling the company. But Eleanor had seen this coming, and her final plan was already in motion. Eleanor died on a Saturday morning. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my apartment, when the call came from Margaret, her long-time personal assistant. Margaret's voice was cracked and quiet. She is gone, Lucy. Peacefully in her sleep. Eleanor Asheford, the monument. The force of nature, who had seemed too essential to ever actually die, was gone. The funeral was tasteful, expensive, and completely impersonal. Her distant nephew, who had once asked Eleanor when she planned to retire so he could unlock the company's real value, gave a generic speech. I stood in the back, wearing the same black dress I had worn to my mother's funeral, wondering if Eleanor would have hated this sterile spectacle as much as I did. The real call came 3 days later, Thursday night. Just after 9 o'clock. I was where I always was, at my desk, finishing a supply chain optimization presentation. My phone lit up with a number that made my stomach drop. Asheford Memorial Hospital. I answered, and the nurse's voice was professionally gentle. Miss Brennan, this is Jennifer. I am calling because we found something in Miss Ashford's personal effects addressed to you. The instructions say it is time, sensitive, and should be delivered immediately. What kind of something? I asked, grabbing my coat and keys without waiting for an answer. A sealed envelope and a leather portfolio, the nurse replied. Miss Ashford left very specific instructions that they be given to you exactly 3 days after her passing. That is tonight. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. I thought about the day Eleanor gave me The Art of War, and told me patience wins more battles than force. I thought about my mother's hospital room, and how I had arrived 3 weeks too late. This time, even though Eleanor was already gone, I refused to be too late. The nurse met me in the lobby and handed me the portfolio, its leather cool and familiar under my fingertips. She recorded a video message 2 weeks before she passed. The nurse said softly. She said you would understand when you watched it. My hands shook as I carried the portfolio to the car. I sat under a flickering street lamp and opened it. Inside were dense legal documents, stock certificates, and transfer agreements. The legal language was complex, but the summary page was starkly clear. Eleanor was transferring 44% of Asheford Industries to me. Combined with the 7% I had accumulated through employee stock purchase programs over the years, that gave me 51% total majority control. My breath came in shallow, fast gasps. This could not be real. She had a nephew. She had the board. She had Hazel. The heir apparent everyone knew about. The succession plan was supposed to be set. But here, notarized 2 weeks before her death, was proof that the succession plan was a complete smokescreen. Eleanor had given me the company. I found the tablet at the bottom of the portfolio, already queued to the video file. I pressed play, and Eleanor's face filled the screen. She was frail, but her eyes were sharp, filled with the calculated intelligence I knew so well. Lucy, she began, her voice raspy but firm. If you are watching this, I am gone. And you are about to inherit something far more complicated than stock certificates. She paused, gathering her breath. I have watched that board position themselves like vultures. I have watched Hazel operate, and I know exactly what she will do the moment I am dead. She will consolidate power. She will purge anyone loyal to the old ways. She will turn Asheford Industries into a profit extraction machine that destroys everything I spent 40 years building. My throat tightened. But you, Lucy, you understand what this company really means. Not because you are sentimental, but because you have already paid the price to protect it. You missed your mother's last Christmas for a merger. You have sacrificed relationships, health, any semblance of a normal life. You have proven loyalty is not just a word for you. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression hardening with final intent. So, here is what is going to happen. These documents transfer majority ownership to you, effective 3 days after my death. That is today. The SEC filing will process automatically. By Friday morning, it will be public record through the Securities and Exchange Commission. But here is the important part, Lucy. Do not reveal this yet. Let Hazel think she has won. Let the board show their true loyalties. Let everyone expose exactly who they are when they believe you are powerless. Her smile was thin and knowing. And when you are ready, when they have shown you everything you need to see, then you make your move. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the quiet authority of someone who has been carrying this company on their shoulders for 23 years. The video ended. I sat in the darkness, holding the legal proof that I was the new owner. Eleanor had orchestrated one final, brilliant test of character. I was supposed to wait in silence while the enemy prepared to destroy everything, including me. At the bottom of the portfolio, wrapped in soft cloth, was the silver fountain pen. A small note in Eleanor's handwriting was attached. This signed Asheford's incorporation papers. Now it is yours. Use it wisely. I held the pen in my palm, its weight comforting and heavy. Eleanor had given me more than ownership, she had given me a strategy. A final lesson in patience. Friday morning was 2 days away. Until then, I was the deposed executive, the humiliated former right hand, waiting for the perfect moment to execute her final, magnificent plan. I had the ownership documents locked away, but Eleanor's instruction was clear. Wait. And waiting meant enduring the fallout of my public execution. The walk back to my 10th floor office felt like traversing a gauntlet. Colleagues froze mid-conversation as I passed. Their faces cycled through shock, pity, and that uncomfortable relief of people grateful it was not happening to them. Whispers followed me like a wake. Did you hear what happened? Lucy Brennan fired just like that. 23 years, and they kicked her out in front of everyone. If they could do that to me, Eleanor's right hand and most trusted advisor, then nobody was safe. And that, I realized, was the entire point of Hazel's performance. Maya, my logistics manager and junior colleague, whom I had personally mentored, looked up from her desk as I approached. She was 26, sharp, and ambitious, and the sight of her face crumbling was almost enough to break my carefully constructed composure. Lucy. What happened? Her voice was a cracked whisper, devastated. I have been terminated, I said simply, pushing open my office door. Effective immediately, I could not look at her. I could not bear to see her grief, when I was barely holding myself together, with sheer willpower, and the knowledge that Friday morning was only 4 days away. Through the floor, tip-ceiling glass walls of my office, Eleanor's philosophy was transparency. Leaders should be visible. Every movement I made was a public spectacle. Colleagues I had mentored, promoted, and fought for during budget cuts, watched me dismantle my professional life piece by piece. Maya brought me the cardboard box, standard issue. The same kind we used for storage in the supply closet. It was humiliating, 23 years reduced to something you would use for old files. I started with the framed photographs. The Seattle expansion groundbreaking from 2007, me standing beside Eleanor. The Toronto acquisition signing. The Chicago plant reopening, where 400 workers cheered. Each photograph told the same story: I did the work. And I was always just outside the frame, essential but invisible. Maya reappeared, her hands shaking as she helped me wrap the frames in tissue paper. She did not speak, but the tears running silently down her face said everything. I moved to my desk drawers, pulling out the accumulated debris of 2 decades. A bronze compass from the Maritime Workers Union. Given after a contract negotiation. So you always know which direction is right. A cracked coffee mug used through countless overnight shifts. A folder of handwritten thank you notes from employees whose jobs I had saved. As I folded my navy blazer, the one I had worn to close the Berlin merger, the memory surfaced, sharp enough to cut my mother's voice on the phone, weak but trying to sound cheerful. I understand, sweetheart. Work is important. We will celebrate Christmas when you get back. But I never made it back. I had chosen the conference room over my mother's final weeks. I had worn that sacrifice like armor for years, believing Eleanor, when she said it mattered, that my mother would be proud. Standing in my glass office, packing up the life built on that foundation, I faced the possibility that my mother died feeling abandoned by the daughter who chose a company over her own family. That uncertainty, the not knowing, lived in my chest, heavy and undissolved. Maya held out my worn copy of The Art of War. You almost forgot this. I took the book, feeling its familiar weight. The pages were annotated with my younger self's observations about strategy and patience. Eleanor's inscription on the inside cover still made my throat tighten. Lucy, patience and timing win more battles than force. Never forget that. Maya lingered, her jaw clenched. This is not right, Lucy. What Hazel did. Everyone knows it. Sometimes right does not matter in corporate America. Maya, I said, placing the book gently into the box. Power matters, and right now, Hazel has it. Do not risk your job defending me. Keep your head down and survive. That is an order. But even as I said it, my hand drifted unconsciously to the fountain pen in my blazer pocket. Eleanor's pen. I sealed the last box. 4 cardboard boxes containing 23 years of my professional life. It did not seem like enough. The tulips sat on my desk, already starting to wilt, a memorial to the bridge I had tried and failed to build. Security escorted me out at 11:43 in the morning. 2 guards, Mike and Travis, men I had known for years, walked beside me in silence. They would not meet my eyes. The lobby felt endless. I drove home through afternoon traffic, my mind numb, focused only on the fountain pen that pressed against my ribs, a secret promise of justice 4 days away. I was exiled, watching my legacy burn from the outside. I almost broke, until Daniel's text shattered the silence of my apartment. I spent the first night surrounded by 4 cardboard boxes I couldn't bring myself to unpack. My small apartment felt oppressive. Too quiet after the constant hum of Asheford Industries. I tried to eat, but the Thai food congealed on the coffee table. I poured wine, but couldn't touch it. I just sat, waiting for what I wasn't entirely sure, vindication. Or perhaps just a sign that the universe registered the injustice. My phone stayed mostly dark. A few texts trickled in from former colleagues. Carefully worded messages of sympathy that committed to nothing actionable. So sorry to hear the news, Lucy. You'll land on your feet. Polite, distant. Safe. Nobody was willing to take a real risk. I couldn't blame them, I knew the playbook. First, the leaders go publicly. Then, anyone associated with them is quietly pushed out. Fear was Hazel's primary management tool, and it was working perfectly. The fountain pen sat on the coffee table, next to the untouched wine, Eleanor's final gift, staring back at me. Friday morning was still 3 days away. 3 days of waiting while Hazel consolidated power and dismantled everything Eleanor had built. Could I wait that long? Or would the waiting destroy me first, leaving me a bitter, deposed shadow? My phone lit up at 8:47 in the evening. shattering the oppressive quiet. It was a message from Daniel Reeves, a senior operations manager who had worked alongside me for 15 years. "Lucy, you need to hear this. She doesn't know anyone recorded it." My heart hammered as I opened the attachment, an audio file. 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. I pressed play. After a moment of static, Hazel's voice filled my living room, sharp, clear, utterly confident in her private cruelty. Charlotte Brennan was a relic, a fossil clinging to Eleanor's skirts. Her termination isn't just necessary. It's symbolic. We're cutting out the cancer of sentimentality that's infected this company for too long. I froze, the phone trembling in my hand. The recording continued, Hazel's voice gaining strength. "Risk management, compliance, HR. They'll all be restructured. Anyone loyal to the old guard goes next. I want a clean slate. No one left who remembers Eleanor's sentimental approach to business." A male voice. One of the new directors interjected, "What about pushback from the floor?" Charlotte was well liked. "There's already talk about the way she was terminated." Hazel's laugh was cold, dismissive, almost amused. "Let them push back. We'll make examples. Fear is more effective than affection. And loyalty built on fear lasts longer than loyalty built on sentiment. By the end of the quarter, everyone will understand that loyalty to me is the only loyalty that matters." The recording ended. I sat in silence, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the crystalline clarity of righteous anger flooding through me. She hadn't just fired me. She had declared war on everything Eleanor had built. Every principle that had made Asheford Industries something more than just another corporation grinding workers into profit margins. And she had done it with such casual contempt, such certainty that she would face no consequences. I played the recording again, then a third time. Each replay sharpened my resolve. My first, hot instinct was immediate action: forward the audio to the board members I trusted. Expose her contempt. Rally the allies. But Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind, studying the impulse. Patience and timing win more battles than force. If I played this card now, if I exposed Hazel before Friday, before the SEC filing went public, I would be reacting from a position of weakness. I would be the bitter, vengeful former employee. Hazel would spin it as desperation. And I would lose the element of surprise that was my greatest advantage. Eleanor had given me more than ammunition. She had given me ownership. Hidden and devastating. I saved the audio file in 3 separate locations. Evidence for later, when the timing was perfect. Then I texted Daniel back. "Thank you. Hold on to your copy. Don't share it with anyone else yet." "Trust me." His response came immediately. "Are you planning something?" I stared at the message for a long moment, the fountain pen still in my other hand. Finally I typed, "I am planning everything." The waiting was over. The strategy had begun. Hazel had revealed herself completely. And now I could begin preparing the final lesson. The anger settled into a cold focus. Eleanor had taught me patience wins more battles than force. And Friday morning, the timing would be perfect. I spent the rest of Thursday in a whirlwind of clandestine preparation. I was no longer the humiliated former executive. I was a field general preparing a surgical strike. Eleanor's final instruction was the only thing that mattered, and I was determined to execute it flawlessly. My first call was to Patricia Chin, one of the few original board members Eleanor had trusted implicitly. Patricia had served on the board since the company's early days, and understood that Asheford's value was built on stability and culture. Not just quarterly earnings. Patricia, it is Lucy. I need to talk to you about Friday's board meeting, I said, my voice low and steady. Lucy. I heard what happened Monday. I am so sorry. The way Hazel handled it was atrocious. Her tone was genuinely sympathetic, but cautious. I know. I interrupted gently. But Friday is going to be different. Very different. Can you meet me tomorrow morning, early? Before anyone else is in the office. There was a long pause, the sound of Patricia processing the gravity in my voice. What are you planning? Justice, I said simply. Eleanor's justice. Will you help me? I then explained the ownership transfer. The SEC filing set to go public at 9 o'clock Friday morning, and Eleanor's final strategic mandate to wait and let Hazel expose herself. Patricia's sharp gasp of surprise was audible, followed by a quiet, deep satisfaction. That woman was always 10 steps ahead. Patricia murmured, almost reverently. Yes, Lucy. Tell me what you need. We coordinated every detail. The most crucial item was the staging of the meeting. I needed one empty chair at the board table, directly opposite Hazel's, marked not by a name, but by a title. Patricia confirmed that a heavy brass nameplate would be placed there. Majority shareholder. It would sow confusion and tension, ensuring Hazel's performance would be laced with insecurity even before I walked in. Daniel Reeves, my ally in operations, received his instructions next. He was tasked with monitoring the SEC filing and ensuring Maya, his assistant, would be the one to rush into the boardroom the moment the public notification dropped. Daniel was skeptical about doing it publicly. We could handle this quietly, Lucy. Behind closed doors. Less humiliating for everyone involved. No, I insisted. The image of Hazel's cold smile burning in my mind. Hazel fired me publicly. She humiliated me in front of employees to send a message. This needs to be public too. Not for revenge, but for the company. For everyone watching to understand that actions have consequences and that Eleanor's principles still matter. By midnight, I had confirmations. The nameplate was set, the SEC filing was processing, Daniel and Patricia were aligned. Now, all that remained was the final wait. Friday morning arrived, cold and overcast, bringing a real clarity that only comes after sleepless nights spent planning an irreversible move. I dressed carefully, pulling on the navy blazer I had worn to close the Berlin merger all those years ago. The gold studs my mother had given me for my 30th birthday were in my ears. I wanted to look professional, composed, unshakable. I picked up Eleanor's fountain pen from my dresser. Its familiar weight settled into my palm. Today, I would use it to sign my name as Chief Executive Officer. Today, the test would be over. I arrived at Asheford Industries at 8:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the quarterly board meeting. I walked to the security desk. Mike, the guard who had escorted me out, looked up, surprise cycling across his face before settling on an expression of guarded hope. Miss Brennan, he said, standing up automatically. I did not expect your badge. A small oversight in the system, I suppose, I said calmly, holding up my badge. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Good to see you, ma'am. The executive conference room was already filling when I reached the 10th floor. I stayed in the hallway, watching through the frosted glass. I could see the directors gather, their voices low with speculation and anticipation. The brass nameplate was positioned exactly where Patricia had promised, at the far end of the long mahogany table. Majority shareholder. I watched as Marcus Webb, one of the longest-serving directors, noticed it. He stared at the reserved seat, then glanced around the room, confusion rippling across his face. "Who is the new investor?" he asked, his voice audible even through the door. I did not see anything in the pre-meeting materials. They had no idea. No idea that the person who would occupy that seat was standing 15 feet away, listening to every word, waiting for exactly the right moment to shatter their assumptions. Hazel arrived at 8:55 in the morning. Perfectly composed in a slate gray suit. Her confidence radiated like heat. She noticed the nameplate, her stride faltering for a fraction of a second before her expression smoothed into practiced ease. "Good morning, everyone," she said, setting down her leather portfolio. "I see you have noticed our reserved seat. We have a new board member joining us today. Someone who shares my vision for Asheford's transformation. Their delayed arrival is purely logistical." The lie was smooth, confident, completely believable. Several directors nodded, reassured. But Patricia Chin and Daniel Reeves exchanged a brief, knowing glance across the table. I stood outside the frosted glass doors, Eleanor's fountain pen gripped in my hand, watching Hazel's performance with the fierce, cold anticipation of a hunter. The timing was about to be perfect. The room was hers, the stage set for her coronation. But the play was about to switch directors. Hazel launched into her presentation at exactly 9 o'clock. With the practiced confidence of someone who believed they were untouchable. Asheford Industries stands at a crossroads, she began, pacing slowly beside the projection screen. We can continue clinging to outdated operational models that prioritize sentiment over efficiency. Or we can embrace the transformation necessary to compete in today's marketplace. Her first slide, titled Operational Restructuring: A Path Forward, appeared. I watched through the glass as she clicked through her vision, each point more damning than the last. Eliminating redundancy in risk management, outsourcing compliance, streamlining supply chain operations by cutting what she called legacy positions. Every bullet point represented departments Eleanor had built, people I had worked with for decades. The era of sentiment is over, Hazel declared, her voice gaining strength. We are implementing immediate workforce reductions, targeting middle management that drains resources without adding measurable value. By quarter 2, we will have reduced operational costs by 30%. Gasps rippled through the room. 30% was not restructuring, it was decimation. Directors looked deeply uncomfortable, torn between the financial incentives Hazel was dangling and the ethical chasm she was demanding they cross. Morale adjusts to new realities. Hazel dismissed, her smile thin and self-satisfied. Reputation follows performance metrics. Our shareholders care about one thing: returns on their investments. And that is exactly what I am delivering. She clicked to a slide showing pristine graphs, projected profit, margins climbing sharply over 18 months, reducing hundreds of human lives to data points. This was the exact moment Eleanor had orchestrated. Hazel, fully revealed as ruthless, arrogant, and contemptuous of the company's core values. At 9:17 in the morning, exactly as planned, Maya burst through the side entrance. Her face was deliberately pale, her eyes wide with carefully constructed panic. She held her tablet aloft. "Excuse me." She cut through Hazel's monologue, her voice cracking slightly. "I am so sorry to interrupt, but you all need to see this. It is urgent." Confusion rippled through the directors. Hazel's expression darkened with irritation. "This is a closed board meeting, Maya. Whatever it is can wait until. The SEC filing just went public. Maya interrupted, her hands trembling. Ownership change effective as of last Thursday. Every phone and tablet in the room lit up simultaneously. Notifications chiming like a chorus announcing something monumental. Directors fumbled for their devices. Faces shifting rapidly from confusion to pure shock as they read the message that had just arrived in their inboxes. Ownership transfer notice. Lucy Brennan holds 44% voting shares of Asheford Industries, combined with existing employee stock program holdings. 51% total ownership. Majority control established. Board recognition required by federal securities law. The notification also named the issuing body, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The room fell into a stunned, deafening silence. Directors stared at their screens, then at each other, then at the empty chair marked majority shareholder. As the meaning slowly dawned. Hazel's face drained of color, her carefully constructed confidence shattering like glass. "This is impossible," she finally managed. Her voice a brittle whisper. "There must be some mistake. Charlotte Brennan was terminated 5 days ago. She has no standing. Terminated by what authority?" I asked quietly from the doorway. Every head snapped toward me. I stood at the threshold. The fountain pen visible in my right hand. My expression was calm, composed. Carrying 23 years of earned authority that no termination letter could erase. "By your authority, Hazel," I continued. My voice soft but cutting clearly through the silent room. "The authority you assumed you had." I did not rush. I walked with the measured grace of someone who belonged there. My footsteps echoed in the silence, punctuating the shocked stillness. Hazel stood completely frozen, her mouth working soundlessly, unable to formulate a response to something she had utterly failed to anticipate. I passed Marcus Webb, the veteran director. He met my eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement, perhaps even approval. Patricia Chen smiled. Subtle but genuine. Daniel Reeves was trying not to laugh. I reached the empty chair marked majority shareholder, but did not sit immediately. Instead, I stood behind it, one hand resting on the leather back, letting the symbolism settle over the room. "For those who don't know the full details," I said calmly, addressing the entire board. Eleanor Ashford transferred majority ownership to me 72 hours before her death. The transfer was completed last Thursday at 11:47 in the evening, 5 days before I was publicly terminated, in a performance designed to humiliate me and intimidate anyone who might question Ms. Winters' authority. I placed the unopened termination packet on the table in front of me. I never signed this. Because I did not need to. The room was silent enough to hear the hum of the projection equipment. Silent enough to hear Hazel's sharp intake of breath, as the full implications registered. "You see," I continued. While Hazel was planning her coronation, Eleanor was planning something else entirely, a test. She wanted to see who would reveal their true nature, when they thought I had no power. And over the past 5 days, you have all shown exactly who you are. Some directors looked down at their hands. Others sat up straighter, recognizing the shifting opportunity. Hazel looked physically sick, her perfect composure having entirely failed. I pulled Eleanor's stock transfer documents from my briefcase and slid them across the polished mahogany. "These are the originals. Every board member should have received formal notification when the Securities and Exchange Commission processed the filing." I glanced deliberately at the 3 new directors Hazel had appointed. But I suspect someone may have intercepted those communications. Finally, slowly, Deliberately, I lowered myself into the chair. The leather creaked beneath me, a sound like judgment being passed. The silence in the boardroom was complete. Marcus Webb placed both hands flat on the table, a gesture of quiet, absolute authority. "For the record," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension, "I vote full confidence in Lucy Brennan as majority owner and acting chief executive officer of Asheford Industries." Patricia Chin did not hesitate. Seconded. Daniel Reeves followed immediately. Then the votes began to cascade. Hands went up, voices followed. People who had sat silent during my humiliation, who had listened to Hazel's plan for decimation, found their voices now. Within 3 minutes, 11 of 13 board members had voted their confidence. "You cannot do this," Hazel rasped, her hands gripping the table's edge. I picked up Eleanor's fountain pen, lifting it so the silver surface gleamed. "I just did," I said evenly. "This pen signed Asheford's incorporation papers 40 years ago. Now it has signed my name as your chief executive officer." I looked directly at her. "Effective immediately, Hazel, you have 2 choices. Resign now with a generous severance package, or stay as vice president of operations, reporting directly to me, and learn what true leadership means when it is not built on fear and contempt." Hazel's face cycled through shock, rage, and a sudden, bitter recognition of defeat. "You planned this," she whispered. "Eleanor planned it," I corrected gently. I just had enough faith in her wisdom to follow through. To wait when waiting was painful. To let you reveal yourself completely before showing you the truth. I signed the new chief executive officer designation document with Eleanor's pen. The scratch of metal on paper was loud, final. "And Hazel," I concluded, setting the pen down, "those tulips I brought on Monday morning. They are still on my desk, wilting now, brown at the edges. They are a monument to the small gestures of respect you dismissed as sentiment. That, more than any graph, is the difference between us." Applause broke out, tentative at first, then building, the sound of people recognizing that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. Hazel gathered her portfolio and walked out, the door clicking softly behind her. The final end of her reign. Hazel was gone, and the company was mine. But as the celebration quieted, the real weight of Eleanor's final gift began to settle. My first act as chief executive officer was to stand before the board and announce that all planned workforce reductions were cancelled. Every position Hazel had targeted for elimination would be reviewed with fresh eyes. I also ordered an immediate freeze and review of all structural changes Hazel had pushed through in the last 3 months, stating clearly that if it prioritized short-term extraction over long-term stability and employee welfare, we would reverse it. Relief washed over the board members' faces. This was the company they remembered, the principled foundation they had been too afraid to fight for. Word spread through Asheford Industries with the speed of an electric current. Lucy Brennan, publicly fired 5 days ago, had returned as the majority owner and chief executive officer. The tension that had gripped the company dissolved into an outpouring of genuine relief and celebration. Maya, Daniel, and many others hugged me, their gratitude overwhelming. "You saved us, Lucy," Daniel said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You saved all of us." But standing in the middle of that applause, I felt strangely hollow. Yes, justice had been served. Yes, Eleanor's legacy was preserved. But the cost was a permanent stone in my chest. I returned to my reclaimed office. The tulips still sat on my desk, wilted and brown at the edges. I walked to my bottom drawer and pulled out my mother's photograph. She was smiling, standing in front of her house decorated with Christmas lights. I had won the company, but I had lost those final 3 months. I had chosen work over family, duty over love. Was it worth it, Mom? I whispered to the photograph, the question in H that would never be answered. That evening, after everyone had gone home, and the building settled into its nighttime quiet, I remembered the leather portfolio. I had been so focused on the stock certificates that I had overlooked a sealed envelope, tucked into a hidden pocket. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Eleanor's distinctive handwriting covered the single page. Lucy, if you are reading this, it means you have reclaimed what was rightfully yours. I am proud of you. But I need you to understand something. This is not really victory. It is responsibility. I know what I asked you to sacrifice. I carry the guilt of that, too. I encouraged your loyalty because I needed someone I could trust. But in doing so, I may have asked too much. I could barely read the next paragraph through blurred eyes. You have a choice now, a choice I never gave you before. You can lead this company, carry forward the legacy we built together, and sacrifice even more of yourself. Or you can sell your shares, walk away with wealth and freedom, and finally build a life that belongs to you, not to Asheford Industries. I sat stunned. I had not expected permission to leave. Whatever you choose, the letter concluded, I will be proud. Because unlike Hazel, you understand what really matters: people, relationships, the small gestures that build trust and community. The tulips you brought were everything I taught you about leadership. Choose wisely, Lucy, and whatever you choose, forgive yourself for what you could not save. Your mother would have understood. She would have been proud, just as I am. Eleanor. I sat in the darkness. Eleanor's final question echoing in my mind. What did I really want? I spent the weekend alone, thinking about the letter and my mother's photograph. I could walk away, sell the shares for a fortune, and finally pursue the life I had surrendered. Or I could stay, carry Eleanor's legacy forward, and try to lead differently, to build a company that valued people without consuming them the way it had consumed me. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I called an all-staff meeting in the main auditorium. Executives, line workers, everyone who made Asheford Industries function, filled the seats. I stood at the podium with Eleanor's fountain pen in my pocket. 5 days ago, I began. I was fired from this company. Not for poor performance, but because I represented loyalty and the belief that employees are people, not line items on a balance sheet. I am back now as your Chief Executive Officer, and I want to make some promises. Not about profit margins or market share. I want to promise you that this company exists to serve the people who work here, the communities we operate in, and the principles we build on. I outlined my vision: no mass layoffs, investment in training, profit, sharing that rewarded long-term loyalty. We will be a company where people matter, where careers are built, not exploited, where small gestures, like bringing tulips to welcome a new colleague, still mean something. The applause was quiet and deep, the sound of people recognizing that something fundamental had shifted. Maya found me in the hallway afterward. You could have walked away, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Retired rich. Why choose this burden? I thought about Eleanor's pen, the weight of the past, and the hope of the future. Because someone has to, I said simply. And maybe, just maybe, I can do it better than I did before. maybe I can lead without sacrificing everything. As I walked back to my office that evening, I felt something I had not felt in years: hope. The fountain pen pressed against my ribs. My legacy, I decided, would honor sacrifice without demanding more of it. It would remember that leadership was about the people who trusted you to do right by them. Sometimes justice does not roar. It arrives quietly. With trembling tulips, a fountain pen, and the courage to choose responsibility over bitterness. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough.